I am Alyssa Consigli. I'm a project director and quality improvement coach at Vermont Child Health Improvement Program. We are excited to be here today with Hannah Gallivan. Today's format of our Lunch and Learn will be interview style. So again, we have the pleasure of being joined by Hannah and learning more about multiple transitions through Hannah's lived experience. Hannah is a rising sophomore at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has cerebral palsy and uses a walker and a wheelchair. Hannah has a service dog and loves to talk about movies and arts. She hopes that our today's conversation will help providers and other care partners around the state work together for a more unified approach to care. So, Hannah, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you are in your transition journey. And I'm going to
Yeah.
stop sharing my slides.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. And thank you to Alyssa and Michelle and VCHIP for having me. Um, as Alyssa said, I'm a rising sophomore at the University of Illinois, about 2 hours outside of Chicago. And I'm a media and cinema studies major, hence the loving to talk about movies piece. Um, I also have cerebral palsy and use a walker and a wheelchair, and I also have a service dog named Gabby. Um, I am in the middle of my care transition, I would say. Um, I have moved some of my care, like my primary care provider and other things, to the adult side of things, but some other care, such as my physiatrist, I am still working on that transition. Um, so I'm kind of in the middle of my care transition, but I have kind of grown up in a lot of different disability spaces and medical spaces. And so I like to think that I have an interesting perspective to offer when you talk about care and how to effectively support youth in their transition, because it can be a really anxiety-inducing, scary time. And I think I've learned a lot, and I would love to share that knowledge with other people and providers and families. So yeah, thank you so much again for having me. And I'm excited to have this conversation today.
All right. Thank you, Hannah, for telling us more about yourself and where you are in your transition journey. Hannah, we are curious to learn what are the most critical challenges that impact the transition journey from your perspective?
I would say just lack of communication is a really big one. Um, Between different providers. You kind of, when you transition from a pediatric provider to an adult provider, it's kind of you're starting all over again. And so I personally feel a lot of pressure to remember all of my medical history and make sure that I'm communicating it in the right way. Um, and I would say like that's a big challenge. I kind of wish that there's more communication between providers so that there wasn't as much of a gap in between those services, and trying to remember all of your medical history and things like that can be um, tricky. I would also say learning how to advocate for yourself in a medical space can be hard. Um, and I am very lucky to have a really good support system in my parents and other disabled folks that I've talked to. But I think if you haven't really done a lot of self-advocacy, or that makes you anxious, it can be really scary to kind of have all of the important medical questions like suddenly directed to you, and wanting to paint a clear picture about like you and your body and how your body works because obviously like we know our body's the best. Um, but sometimes it's really scary to kind of advocate for yourself and know that your experience is the right one for you and like trying to communicate that to providers. So I would say those are two of the biggest challenges that I've experienced personally.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Hannah. So as you think about communication between providers and you think about building some of those advocacy skills in young adults, have you thought about any potential solutions or anything that um, healthcare providers or others can do to help support or overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think, and this is like hypothetical, so um I know that it's not like as easy as it sounds, but I think like if adult and pediatric providers could kind of meet together with families and patients before they make the official transition, it would be really um helpful because then both providers can kind of share their knowledge, and the pediatric provider can share their experience with the patient, and then the adult provider could say, this is what adult care kind of looks like, this is what you can expect, this is what questions you might be asked to answer. And I think it would just provide more opportunities for the providers to talk together, but also for the families to um, know each member of the like care team and ask any questions that they might have, um, and talk about things before kind of jumping off the deep end, so to speak. Um, and I think that would be a really good way to kind of facilitate that communication between people and make it a less um, scary environment in the beginning so that people know that they have people supporting them and that they're allowed to ask questions and kind of get a sense of um, what adult care looks like.
Yeah, Hannah, I love that. I love the idea, like you said, of really having those opportunities for that young person to be with their care team, their pediatric care team, and again, have that sort of warm handoff to the adult care team and have those opportunities to reduce the anxiety. And I love that, like what to expect, when you kind of come to the adult side. And it's a great way to ensure that you're building a relationship between all the providers too, and then offering almost that safety net for that adult provider too, to be able to ask the pediatric provider any questions too. So I love that idea, Hannah, of following up with that. Did you have any advice around the advocacy part? It's almost like that meeting is also another way to instill and build some of those skills.
Yeah, I'm still figuring a lot of that out for myself, to be honest, but I think I would say that I do a lot of practice with my mom, like before things happen. We'll kind of like role play if I'm really nervous about something, or I'm like, I don't know what they're gonna ask me, or something, whether it be like an appointment or having to call somebody on the phone or anything like that. Sometimes we'll practice. Um, like hearing the questions and kind of um, hearing what my responses might be, so that can be helpful for me personally. Um, I also kind of do a little bit of like a self-esteem meditative kind of thing often, where I just remind myself like you know your body the best and you know your experience the best. Um, and you shouldn't be afraid to speak up for what you need and what you feel is right because at the end of the day, like doctors are going to give you advice and they want they obviously want your care to be as good as it can be, but at the end of the day, like you're in charge of your own self. And so I often like will repeat that in my head a couple of times just to up my self-confidence a little bit, but I think I'm still figuring a lot of it out, and I've had a lot of people in my corner in terms of self-advocacy, and been able to practice it throughout my school years. So I'm not very new to it. Like I've done it for a while just in school and in other places where I have to be an advocate for my own needs. So I think that also helps. Um, but yeah, I would just say um, you know yourself the best, and like obviously people are going to give you medical advice and advice in general, and you can listen to it and you can do what you want with it, but also I wouldn't be afraid to like speak up for yourself or challenge it if you think what that's right, because sometimes people give you suggestions but they don't actually like live in your body, so you might have a different feeling about something, and I would just say don't be afraid to like tell people about your experience and yourself, because that can also help them inform their care, like in the future, is being like, oh, like I know this about this person now, and I know how their body works, and so in terms of the suggestions I give, it could maybe help them expand on the advice and practices that they do with you.
Yeah, that's great. I love that advice of the role playing and practicing some of those skills. So thank you for that. Hannah, have there been education or resources that have been helpful, for you as you think about where you've been throughout your journey? And then also, have you considered anything that could be missing potentially?
Yeah, I am really lucky to have kind of grown up in some wonderful disability communities um, through Xena Mountain Farm in Lincoln, Vermont, and also through an organization that supports disabled girls. And so I think that without those things, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today, because sometimes all you need is someone to be like, I can relate to what you're going through or what you're feeling in your body. Um, and I often will go to my group chats or call people on the phone if I'm going into a new appointment, or if I'm thinking about getting a new wheelchair or a new walker. I have people who have been in those situations before and know what works best for them and their bodies, and so they're able to give me really good advice. And it's been really nice to have them in my corner. I think I definitely wouldn't be as secure in my disabled identity if it weren't for people kind of paving the way for me and saying like, I've been in this situation, I've been to this doctor before. I have friends who are moms and have disabilities, which is really cool. And so just knowing that those people exist and are out there and have had to have some of the same conversations with their providers is really comforting. And I often will be like, what do you think is the best way to approach this topic with a doctor? Or I'm looking for a new wheelchair. Like, what are the things that you really like in certain models, or what are things to think about when you ask questions? And I think that's been really helpful, just to have people who share some of your lived experience. I think for me, what's often missing is just the sense of bodily autonomy, especially in the medical space. What I mean by that is a lot of times, especially if you are physically disabled, um, medical professionals will often have a lot of ideas about you and your body and what you might want, um, and give you those suggestions without making sure that you know that it's a choice. Um, I have grown up and have had some really amazing providers, and also some doctors who I've seen, and they just throw out a bunch of suggestions and are kind of like, oh, we think this is in your best interest for you, and not really making it clear that it's my decision whether I want to or not. I think especially if you're physically disabled, I think a lot of people view it as like, oh, you must want everything possibly that we can do to like cure you or make you better or even just make your life a little easier. And while that's sometimes really helpful, one thing that I didn't really have a lot of for a while was people saying to me, just remember, like, it's your choice. And it's your choice whether you do this or not. And people are going to give you advice, but it's your body. And so I think emphasizing autonomy, especially with patients with disabilities, is really important because often we're kind of treated as our bodies are like anomalies compared to other people's. And I've gotten a lot of like, oh, do you know your body does this and everybody else's body does this? And it's like, I know that I've been disabled for most of my life. And that's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for ways to like enhance my quality of life. And in a way that feels right for me and give me options of what I want to do. And so I think emphasizing autonomy is really, really important. And for me was something that was missing for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I really appreciate, and value the way that you're focusing on the autonomy and again, the advocacy for young people. And I think those are, like you had mentioned, hard skills and things that need to be practiced and learned, over time. I also heard you say like building community and having those support folks in your corner and people to lean on is have been helpful, tools and resources for you throughout your, life and particularly during your transition journeys. So that's great. Thank you. Hannah, I would love to know a little bit more about your thoughts and perspectives on how you think pediatric providers specifically can help young people, whether they're adolescents, teenagers, or young adults, and caregivers, how they can support, young people and their families through the transition journey. And then, conversely to that, how do you think adult providers specifically can help, in that journey? So, again, why don't we start with your perspectives on what you think pediatric providers specifically can do to help young adults and families through the journey?
Yeah, I think being a pediatric provider is really cool because you kind of get to watch your patients kind of grow up and know them and know their bodies and see people change and evolve. And I think that's a really cool perspective to have. Um, Kind of similar to what I've already said, but like I think it's really, really important, no matter how young somebody is to like really include them in all of the conversations you have. Um, Kind of encourage that autonomy and self-advocacy. Um, I was in a lot of spaces when I was younger where providers would ask questions to my parents and not to me. Um, and I would really have loved to be included in those conversations and asked what my perspective was because, you're talking about me as a person and my body. And I think even at a young age, it just sets like a really important precedent for the patient and the patient's families that like you value their perspectives and you value what they have to say. And I think it puts people's families at ease when they know that their children and the people they look after are being listened to and heard and in a really meaningful way. Um and I would just say, yeah, just like encouraging that open conversation and autonomy and always making sure to say like this is your choice, and this is your body, and I'm not going to tell you what to do with your body, um, because I think that would have really changed my perspective had I heard that when I was growing up. Um, and I think, yeah, just maintaining those open conversations. And then I think from an adult perspective, an adult provider perspective, um, kind of being frank about things, um, and saying, like, this is what this is going to look like. This is the questions that I might ask you. But also telling people that um, they can be supported, because I think when you transition to adult practices, there's a lot of like pressure to like know what you're talking about on your own and be on your own and do things by yourself, and independence is super cool and awesome, but I think um the reminder of there's still people in your corner, and like we're still here to support you, and it's okay if you don't know all the answers, and it's okay if you ask questions. Like I think that's really important. um and also from a like your body's changing perspective, like we don't really talk a lot when you're, at least for me, growing up, I didn't really, or like in health class, I didn't really talk a lot about sex ed as it related to being a person with a disability. Um, and it is something that people do and go through and deserve to know about. And I think, again, with disability, it can be a little convoluted because people don't want to say the wrong thing or don't want to make the wrong impression. But if I had had more um, guidance from people about like, this is a really normal thing that people go through. And even though your body might work a little differently, like this is a very important thing for you to know about, and just like know about how to take care of yourself, and um, what going to the gynecologist looks like, or anything like that. Especially as you're an adult, like that's something that um you're gonna have to do at some point. And so just having those conversations about like this is something that you might have to do, and it's not supposed to be scary, but it's also like something that everybody goes through, and just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you like don't deserve to know about this. And um I think that's also really important.
Yeah, Hannah, just to reflect on what you said, I liked how you were talking about providers, pediatric providers specifically, of really helping to, and the vision that came to my mind was coaching the young person through, like, here's some of these skills, and really helping that young person attain those skills. And then I think what I heard you say was also from the adult side, carrying those forward, and having that adult provider continue to build some of those skills, and help that young person create a comfortable environment where they can continue to kind of explore and build some of those skills, despite being a little bit more of a scary environment, or environment where there might be more expectations, on the young adult. Right. So I think those are great. Um, Hannah, as you're thinking, I know you've had some experiences, as you mentioned in the beginning, of already transitioning your healthcare to an adult primary care provider, and you're also in process of thinking about transitioning your specialty care to an adult provider. Um, from your past experience, and then thinking about future experiences, what do you, or what would you imagine or like to see an ideal transition and transfer look like, from pediatric to adult care?
Yeah, I think like similar to what I said about like ideas to make the transition easier, like open dialogue between providers would be lovely. I would love that. And especially my specialty care provider, my rehab medicine doctor, like he's great, and I would be interested in like hearing what he has to say to my next provider. Um, and including me in that conversation and including my family in that conversation because he has a lot of great things to offer. And I would just be interested to know what he would have to say to my next provider. Um, and then I think, um, yeah, I think it can be really like it still can be scary for me. Um, Even at 19, it still can be really anxiety inducing. I'm not a huge fan of going into hospitals and going into doctor's offices. And one of the things that really struck me was when I first met my um, physiatrist, he had introduced himself and we sat down and we had talked and he said, I can tell you're a little bit nervous. And I said, yeah. And he said, that's really understandable. But please know that like I'm here to support you. And if you're ever uncomfortable with anything, you don't have to do it. Um, Let me know if what I'm saying doesn't feel right to you, isn't working for you. And I just felt really seen in that moment. It really struck me because I hadn't really had a healthcare provider like talk to me so frankly in that way and said like not only like I know you're nervous and it's okay, um, but also like you're in charge here. Like you're the boss. And he said, we can always loop in your parents and your parents also deserve to be part of the conversation. But I had never had someone say, you and only you are like fully in charge. And that really struck me just because I had been kind of scared to advocate for myself or challenge what a medical provider was saying because I was kind of like, I mean, what they say is kind of, I was kind of under the impression that what they say is kind of the holy grail and like they have your health in mind, so you should listen to them all the time. And so I was kind of like nervous about saying something to the contrary. Um, but this provider in particular, kind of gave me the confidence to know that it was okay to like advocate for myself, speak up when things didn't feel right or sound right. Um, and so I think that was really impactful for me. And I think ideally, like, that's what I would really love in my own transition is just a care team of people, of which there are a really awesome group of them, but who continue to encourage me to be confident in my own self and encourage me to speak up for myself and trust me with my own body and my own medical decisions. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Hannah. I can't help but keep picking up on the communication focus that you keep kind of bringing up, which I think is really important and sometimes can be challenging, during those transitions. But again, as you've kind of continued to articulate and share, so important, particularly to provide that continuity of care and help, ease anxieties too. Hannah, I also love that you shared that story of your pediatric providers really instilling that and trying to build that self-confidence within you and starting to set the stage for your advocacy skills and again that desire your desire to continue to have that as building those skills and the advocacy and self-confidence piece moving forward into your transition journey. I think that that's great. um, Before we start wrapping up and thinking about your parting words or advice for young adults and families, would love to open it up if there's any questions from the audience. Again, audience participants can feel free to put a question in the chat and I'm happy to read it on your behalf. If you're comfortable, you can certainly raise your hand and ask. We can call on you. Again, just a reminder that this is being recorded. So I will stop talking for a minute and see if there's any questions that pop up in the queue.
Hi, Alyssa. I do have a question.
Sure, Karen.
So, I'm Karen from the Vermont Family Network, and I'm just wondering from the logistical and insurance viewpoint, if there were to be meetings set up between a pediatric and adult provider, a medical provider, how does how does that work with insurance? How is it billed? Is that something that's often, difficult to arrange because of that piece?
Yeah, so Hannah, I'll take this one because it sounds like
Yeah.
it's more of a structural
Well,
one.
yeah, it
No
is.
Um,
worries.
Not for
um,
Hannah, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's dependent on healthcare payers and insurers. I think that potentially is a structural barrier is some of those insurance pieces and the payment pieces. I think that's a great conversation to bring forth with some of our healthcare, reform leaders and other leaders in the field. But again, and Karen, you're right, it could be a barrier depending on insurance and the payers too, and certainly something to look at too.
Yeah, because I agree that that would be, a really good thing to be able to effect
Yeah,
a successful transition. But again, these practical issues of how is it going to be paid for are often, what trips it up. And there is a huge difference, as Hannah said, between a pediatric provider of any service and an adult. And it is a huge chasm. I am a parent of an adult child with a disability, and it really is quite enormous, the difference between the two.
yeah. And Karen, there is some work happening nationally, as far as building some awareness in this payment field. I know that Gut Transitions is doing some work, and they also have some guidance. But again, as you know, it's different from state to state and payer to payer. But again, that is an area, definite area of opportunity and for future, considerations and future reforms.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Hannah, while we're waiting for other questions maybe to come in, I am wondering if you have any thoughts or guidance on how young people and families might address multiple transitions and thinking about is there a preference on the order of which young people or families might make a transition? For example, primary care before specialty care or specialty care before primary care or before college, after college. Again, just curious, based on your experience, if you had any guidance or thoughts.
Yeah, obviously everyone's experience is different, and everyone's scope of care is different. But from my experience, I kind of started that transition with my primary care provider. I think because I don't know how old I was, maybe 16. I think because we were kind of aging out of my primary care provider, um, and also just knowing that I would be 18 in a few years, so it just kind of felt like the right time for me, and our family. Um, we are really lucky to have like a great um health center right in Bristol. Um, and our family care provider is awesome and is like super lovely. And the first time I met her, she talked to me a little bit and then was like, "Do you mind if I ask you some questions when your mom's not in the room?" And just gave me a space to talk about things um, on my own, which was really helpful. Um, Not that it would have been harder to do with my parents in the room, but she just is very she does a really good job of giving patients space to address anything with her. Um and that has been really helpful. I We kind of just did the primary care before specialty care kind of just because because it worked for our family and like the timeline. But for me personally, I feel a little more prepared to do to like transfer my specialty care because I already have transferred my primary care. Um, it's kind of like a good foundation, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Um, because my primary care also communicates with my specialty care. Um, so it kind of made sense. I mean, I don't know if this is what my family was thinking of, but for me, it kind of makes sense that we would have switched primary over first because they're the one that is kind of communicating with everybody else. So that was a really nice foundation. And when I met my primary care, I was able to tell her like this is who my physiatrist is, this is who um supplies my wheelchair and my walker. And so she was able to get in contact with them and make a lot of introductions, which was really helpful. So I think personally, in my experience, I'm glad that we did primary care um first because it like sets up a good, like I said, like a good foundation for conversation between providers and like they all kind of go back to your primary, so it works well. And I would just say to like families, um, it also like don't feel bad if you're nervous, don't feel bad if you're anxious. Like as the patient, I often feel that way, and sometimes I feel like I shouldn't feel that way, and I should present like a really strong front, and I should be super confident all the time. But the reality is, it can be really scary. And that is so understandable. And the best providers will kind of take you as you are and be like, I understand your anxiousness and it's okay. And they'll do things to ease some of that. And I would encourage like people as parents and caregivers to um again like encourage autonomy in your patients um or your children or whoever you care for because that is a really really powerful thing to know that your decision is your decision and that your family and your providers are going to back you up um whatever you decide because then it eliminates a lot of like oh I don't know if I did the right thing or anything like that. But if you have your support systems supporting you and you make that really clear with whoever you care for, um, that will make the patient, speaking from experience, feel a lot better about advocating for themselves and feeling confident in making their own decisions. Um, but yeah, I'm so grateful for the providers that I have. They're awesome and they have made me feel really safe and supported and are really open to all kinds of different dialogue. And um, I hope that, if anything, this encourages patients and families to speak up for themselves. Again, like no one knows lived experience better than you or your family, and so you should not be afraid to challenge something or speak up for yourself just because they're in the medical field doesn't mean they necessarily have all your answers magically. And sometimes you kind of got to dig to get what you really need, but it's worth it because it can make you feel more comfortable and more satisfied. Um, and yeah, I would just say that's a really big part of what I've learned. And I'm also really grateful to have a service dog for these moments because I bring her to my appointments and I had to get blood drawn last year and I was really nervous about it. I had never done it before and it scared me. And, having a dog's head on your feet while it's happening isn't it makes it a lot easier. And so that obviously this is not an experience that everyone will share, but thinking of ways to support people when things like that are happening is also really important. And I definitely couldn't do it without my family and Gabby and yeah, but I would just say you know yourself the best. And at the end of the day, um, you should make the decision that feels right for you, and you shouldn't feel any shame about it because you're living it.
That's great, Hannah. Thank you for all your advice and your wisdom and your guidance. I think as we think about navigating multiple transitions, it can be scary and even challenging to think about what to do first. And again, what I'm hearing you say is your experience, that you've shared. You've offered some great wisdom, great. I love how the communication pieces that you've brought up, and also the building the confidence and self advocacy, of that young person, of all young people. And then what I heard you just say, a few minutes ago too, of just also, I appreciate you normalizing and saying just acknowledging your own fears and anxieties. And, I think many people, young people and adults too, when they're in medical situations and healthcare situations, it can be scary and it can be anxiety provoking. And again, you've offered some really great insights and wisdoms for supporting families and young people through this process and through this journey. That we've got a couple more minutes left. Are there any other last minute questions or wonders for anybody? As we wait for people, I know that Michelle looks like has just plugged in a survey. I would love to get some feedback. Again, your feedback helps us improve these sessions and think about opportunities for additional topics too. So, yeah. All right. Hannah, I don't know if you can see in the chat, but we've got some praise coming in, some gratitude for you sharing your experience and being with us today. And I'd also like to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us live. Again, this session has been recorded, and we will be sure to get this out to all of you and share it widely. Again, Hannah, thank you for all you have done, today to share your wisdom and advice. And I know the impact of the work that you're doing and the advice that you shared will be spread widely. And again, will be shared with the providers, across the state. So thank you for sharing your experience and perspectives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone.